Welcome to another Splatoon 2 video on the channel. So this time last year, Splatoon 2 received a brand new game mode for the series, Clan Blitz, and people were hoping that we would receive another new mode this year. I guess those hopes were only raised when people did discover in the files of the game an unreleased game mode that was heavily based on the 8-ball levels from the Octo expansion DLC. Also, people did get playable a version of the Rocket game mode that was also discovered back in 2017. More recently, people did discover that the balloons that can be found in the single player and the Octo expansion DLC, they are now also available for the multiplayer, which has raised hopes for a balloon multiplayer mode that would be brand new for the series, just like Clan Blitz. Maybe it would work similar to the local multiplayer mode that we got in Splatoon 1 on the Wii U. I've always thought that mode would be really cool to see in the main multiplayer, how pretty much you got the balloons spawning around the stage and pretty much whoever splatted the most balloons would win. But what has happened to all of those game modes, in particular Rocket and 8-ball? It looks like that we will not be getting any new modes for Splatoon 2. So what has happened to the modes that people did discover early on in the year? Nintendo did remove the files for the 8-ball and the Rocket mode early on with a recent update. I do believe it was with the 4.0 update. So it looks like to me that we will not be getting those modes. But what I want to ask, or what I want to propose in this video, is that maybe they weren't modes to begin with. Maybe Nintendo were testing out the mechanics for something like 8-ball by making it playable in the multiplayer first, and just to work out what works, what doesn't work in the game. Maybe Nintendo never planned to add in another game mode for Splatoon 2 outside of Clan Blitz, but they were just using the multiplayer to test out new mechanics for the Octo expansion DLC, and that is how we got the famous 8-ball levels in Octo expansion DLC. Maybe that is how those levels started out. Maybe they did start out in the multiplayer first before Nintendo worked out the mechanics, worked out whether those levels would be fun to play. Maybe they tested the 8-ball mechanic out first in the multiplayer before designing levels around the 8-ball. Maybe that is what is happening. That is just what I believe. I don't think the 8-ball mode was ever planned to be a multiplayer mode. I do believe Nintendo did test out some single player ideas in the multiplayer. In terms of Rocket, Rocket has been in the files of the game for a long time. I do believe since the game did launch. So if Nintendo ever wanted to release that Rocket game mode, I feel like Nintendo would have done it by now. Just like the 8-ball mode, I don't think Rocket was ever intended to be a brand new multiplayer mode. Now, I hope to be wrong, but I don't think we will ever see the 8-ball and the Rocket game modes released to the public, just because some content was discovered in the files of the game. It doesn't necessarily mean that they will make its way to the actual game itself. I guess a good example of this is that in the first game, people did discover playable Octolings, and of course, playable Octolings never made it to the first game. It took to the DLC for the second game for us to get playable Octolings. So I think this is just another example of content being found in the files of the game. I don't think they were ever intended to be released to the public. I don't think they were ever intended to be game modes. I think Nintendo just were testing out what would work in a single player setting in terms of the 8-ball modes. Or something that I haven't considered yet in this video is that maybe Nintendo did have intentions of releasing a brand new game mode this year, but unfortunately when they did try out possible new game mode ideas, maybe Nintendo couldn't balance out that game mode, or maybe Nintendo thought, you know what, these 2 game modes that we are working on, they are not good enough at all, they wouldn't be good for the players, so they decided against adding in those 2 game modes into the game, but they just decided to leave the code in the game, and that is how people discovered those 2 game modes. But I have always thought that the reason we didn't get those game modes is based on the reason that I did talk about early on in the video. Don't get me wrong, I thought when I first heard about the 8-ball mode, I thought we would have got that pretty much soon after when the Octo Expansion DLC did come out, but pretty much a few months after when the Octo Expansion DLC did come out and we didn't get the 8-ball mode, I did think that maybe the 8-ball mode in particular, maybe it was never intended to be a new multiplayer mode. In terms of the balloons now being supported in the multiplayer in the files of the game, maybe that is just Nintendo testing out the balloons for the multiplayer. Maybe Nintendo don't have any intentions of adding in the balloons in its own separate mode, for example. Maybe Nintendo will just add them in to a Shifty Station stage, for example. So yeah, I just don't feel like we will see those game modes, but maybe you guys feel different to me. Maybe you think there is still a chance for us to get another new mode for Splatoon 2. I just don't feel like we will get that now. I think now all what we will get is just balance updates and Splatfest, and that will be it in terms of content for the game. Hope to be wrong, I really do. I would love for us to get another new game mode to go alongside the modes that are currently in the game. I would love to see that balloon mode, for example. That would be really fun to see, but I just can't see it happening. I just can't. Maybe Nintendo removed all of the files in terms of 8-ball and the Rocket game mode because they saw that people got their hopes raised by the prospect of a brand new game mode from those 8-ball and Rocket files, so they took them out to quell those hopes, but also just to leave it a little bit open-ended. Nintendo has took out some code before and then they released that content. A good example of this is that they did remove code for that brand new Salmon Run stage we got recently, the Ruins of Ark Polaris. Maybe Nintendo will be adding in those missing game modes, but my message to you is don't expect that to happen. Don't expect that to happen at all. Like what I said before, just because content was found in the files of the game, it doesn't necessarily mean it will make its way to the actual game itself. I don't think they were ever intended to be actual game modes, but maybe I could be wrong. Maybe you guys feel completely different to me. Let me know your thoughts about this in the comment section below. But that is it for this video, and I will see you in another video soon, hopefully.